Pramod Madhav is joining us live from Colombo with more details on this. Pramod, good morning. A lot of questions about what Gotabaya Rajapaksa is going to be doing next. He's all set, we're being told, to leave from Maldives and head to Singapore. He wants a private jet to do that. But amid all of these developments, he still hasn't resigned.
Akshita, it's a very pleasant morning in Sri Lanka today, but at the same point, the protest and everything still continues because the president has not so far resigned. The deadline for the president was around yesterday 12 p.m. in the night, and still he has not resigned. So that is kind of turning into a huge issue. And the important factor that we need to think about currently is that the protesters have already taken over 4 government institutions: the President's Palace, President's Secretariat, Prime Minister's residence, and finally the Prime Minister's office. And the only most important building that still the protesters have to eye today, or maybe because the protests are still continuing, is the Parliament House. So ruckus near the Parliament House is expected. Yesterday night also there were protests over there. Tear gas was fired against the protesters as well. But the issue here is that the appointment of Ranil Wickremesinghe as the acting president did not go well with the protesters. So they are still protesting against it, and they demand that the president and acting president resign at once. Not just that, we're also getting reports that the commanders of the tri-chief, the CDS, and various party leaders have also urged the acting president Ranil Wickremesinghe to resign. But he is firm on one point, claiming that he is fighting against the fascist forces, and that's the reason he will be as the acting president until an all-party government is formed. In fact, yesterday he also informed the Speaker to appoint a new Prime Minister who would be acceptable by all the parties. So that way he doesn't look like he wants to resign anytime sooner, and this is turning into a huge issue in Sri Lanka.
You know, what's very clear, Pramod, is that civilians haven't gotten their way, despite the fact that they've staged these unprecedented protests. You've got Gotabaya Rajapaksa fleeing from Sri Lanka. He hasn't resigned yet. Ranil Wickremesinghe, whose resignation also civilians have demanded, he hasn't resigned. Instead, he's been made the acting president as well. So the civilians, no doubt there, will continue their protests. Pramod, stay on with me. I also want to take our viewers through all that played out in the last 24 hours. Pramod was reporting from the ground as these massive protests broke out in the heart of Colombo. And let's get you some of the most defining images of that stir. Police dispersed the Lankan citizens residing in Maldives who were protesting against the government for providing a safe haven to Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The Sri Lankan police used tear gas to disperse protesters near the Prime Minister's office. Protesters were demanding that Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Ranil Wickremesinghe must go. Helicopters hovered over protesters in Colombo after a state of emergency was declared. A curfew was imposed in the western province of the country. That curfew has now been lifted. Protesters stormed 3 main buildings in the capital, demanding the resignation of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. These protesters are still occupying these buildings. Remember, both leaders haven't resigned. Next is an image that's coming to define the civilian protest. A couple seen kissing after participating in anti-government protests that led to the taking over of the Prime Minister's office in Colombo.